Welcome back, everybody, to the Alpha Concepts podcast, where we talk about everything going on in the gun culture, from training to gear and gun rights advocacy. Hi, I'm Thomas Kroll, and I'll be your host on this adventure that we're going on together. And on today's show, I have a very special guest, Rob Pincus, and he's got a resume about a mile long. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm doing great, Thomas. I appreciate you having me on the show. We've interacted a lot, over the years, I guess, but it's great to be on the show and looking forward to the questions and the conversation.
Thank you very much again. And I know you're one of the busiest people in the industry. The fact that you were able to peel off a few minutes for us is absolutely amazing. Let's start by saying, how many miles a year do you fly?
It really does vary. You think about it like a trip to South Africa, could add, 20% with one, 2-week trip to the total mileage. So I usually go by days on the road, right? I mean, some years I drive more than fly, and some years I spend more time out of the country than others. So the real trick is how many days a year do I spend, not in one of my homes, wherever I happen to have them at any given time. And normally it's been 250 to 300 days a year away from the home since about 2008 or 9.
That is a lot.
Yeah. So even this year with the coronavirus, obviously a lot of travel got changed and canceled and shifted around. I still have generated a lot of miles because I've been going back and forth, either driving or flying between Colorado and Florida almost constantly. One of the other things I sometimes joke about is that I very rarely spend a full week in any one place. And this year, that's happened once in August, or maybe it was early September. At some point, I did just recently spend 7 nights in a row at my apartment in Denver. And that's the first time that's happened since, I think, February or March of 2019. So it's still constant motion, even though I'm not traveling as much for teaching classes in person as I would, during any other time in the last decade.
Right. So let's talk about what you have going on. I mean, you are involved in numerous companies as well as different organizations in the firearm industry. You've got your own training company, ICE Training. You've developed the combat-focused shooting methodology, which has applied to other entities where you've developed their training curriculum, such as the now defunct Gander Mountain Academy, as well as actively the United States Concealed Carry Association. You're involved in a firearm manufacturing company. I believe you have a pistol design that you're helping develop. What else? You are on the boards of how many organizations? Walk the Talk America, 2AO, the Second Amendment organization, of course, Save the Second. What am I missing?
I think that was most of the highlights. I'm involved with a lot of different media stuff. Personal Defense Network has a lot of different facets to it. For example, not only the in-person training and the obviously the videos and articles that we do. There's distance education classes that go through PDN, as well as the tour, which got canceled this year because we just couldn't, know what the landscape looked like in early March when we had to make that decision. But the tour also involves recruiting other instructors, developing them, helping them work on their ability to present information through video, through distance education, as well as supporting their in-person classes outside of the ICE Training Company or combat-focused shooting family. So there's a lot of collaboration and coordination that goes there. I work as a consultant for a lot of different companies, certainly in product development. Probably the latest new cool thing that's on the market that I had a hand in is the PSD pistol from FK Bernot that's just come into the U.S. here recently. It's the polymer framed version of the pistol that fires the 7.5 FK round. And they're really excited about that gun being here. It's an amazing round. The gun is very evolved from the original field pistol, which was depending on when you ordered one, it was between $5,000 and $7,000 per pistol. The new pistol is under $2,000 and is not just designed to fire the 7.5 FK round, but it also is multi-caliber. So with a barrel swap, you can also fire 10 millimeter or even 9 millimeter NATO out of it. And that's an exciting pistol to see on the market. So I was involved in some of the final development of that, particularly for the U.S. market, as opposed to just having a polymer gun. They certainly know everything they need to know about engineering over there, but some of the design features, including the evolution to a multi-caliber platform that included 9mm, was something I was heavily involved with last year. So getting involved in product design and development, in addition to what we're doing with Avidity Arms, with my own, from the napkin sketch pistol, has been a big part of the last decade as well.
I mean, and nowadays with the ammunition shortages and everything, having caliber swaps is a pretty big deal. It allows some people to keep shooting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know a lot of people, kind of jokingly, put their 40 caliber Smith & Wesson barrels back into their Glocks, and just sort of using that as symbolically and literally. There's been several people in my classes over the last month who have shot 40 caliber that haven't shot a class with 40 caliber maybe ever in their lives, but they bought a 40 caliber gun in the 90s or in the 2000s, realized that 9mm was probably a better defensive round, bought the barrel swaps, magazines, whatever they needed for some of the striker fired guns where it's easy to do that. And a lot of them are putting those 40 caliber barrels back in because they have a stockpile or it's been easier to find during this drought. So, while the 7.5 FK isn't a personal defense gun per se, if you had one of the advantages of having it as a multi-caliber design that includes 9mm is that, let's say there was a military special operations team or a law enforcement team that wanted to utilize the capabilities of the 7.5 round, but realized that they can't justify spending the amount of money it would take to meet their training practice interests over the year. They can now put a 9mm barrel in, use the 9mm magazines, get 80% of their practice, 90% of their practice in operating the gun with a 9mm, and then swap to the 7.5. So it sort of works both ways. You want to have the ability in some cases to take a firearm that uses an obscure caliber and still have it useful with a common caliber swap. And on the other hand, when the quote unquote common calibers get hard to find because of a rush on the market like we see right now, sometimes it's nice to have a more obscure option that you can find on the shelves or that you can stockpile a little bit easier and not be tempted to run through because an opportunity came up to take a class or something like that.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of after Sandy Hook when we had similar but not quite as severe ammunition drought. And I knew a lot of guys who got 40 caliber conversion kits for their 9mm pistols, and of course, they put them away when 9mm became available again, and they've dusted off those conversion kits, and they're starting to shoot 40 cal again because it just is more readily available than the 9mm. You can get 9 if you want to pay 60, 70 cents a round, but at that point, you can be shooting 5.56 for the same amount of money. And let's face it, my AR-15 pistol is a lot more, it puts a bigger smile on my face than my 9mm pistol, that's for sure. So obviously, a lot of lessons that we learned after Sandy Hook are coming back full circle. And, it's unfortunate that the ammunition right now is hard to come by. It definitely is having an effect on more of the advanced training classes, like the defensive shooting fundamentals, for example. You can add hundreds of dollars to the cost of a training class just in ammunition, and that is that's preventing some people from getting the training that they want to go out and get.
Yeah, it is. I think it's important to remember that there's a huge difference between somebody who is just a new firearms owner or someone who's just realizing that they might want to take their defensive shooting skills more seriously than they have in the past. The idea that they need a 500 round day is pushed out there a lot, repetition and things like that. And all that's true for maximizing skill development. But I wouldn't want people to think that because they only have or can only afford or can only justify, 150, 200, 250 rounds, that they can't get a lot of value out of those rounds. Unfortunately, sometimes I'll see curriculum, I'll see classes that are being run where there's a lot of rounds being used in repetition mode before skill development has really occurred. So it's important to really slow down and conserve ammo while you're truly learning techniques and while you're learning skills at the very lowest level, and not get high level repetition until you're really doing the right thing, because you essentially are going through the process. We refer to it as experiential learning. There is great value in experiential learning when you have the time and the resources and the dedication, I guess, to the process. But that doesn't mean it's the only option. And sometimes we need to step back from just kind of letting people experiment and figure it out and feel it under the supervision of an educator or a coach, and really stair step them through. Here's how you do it. Here's the slow rep. Here's the very smooth rep. And then eventually here's the contextual replication, over time to own the skill. And that's not always the way we do it in our programs. Our programs are very experiential. I do think that's the best way to learn and adapt to a new skill, but it's not the only way. So in these times of drought, we do drop our round count pretty considerably. We went from, normally we'll tell people to bring 400 to 500 rounds per day. And just recently I did a class in Florida where I think we told them between 300 and 350 for the full day. Had a full class. It happened to rain a lot that day, thunderstorms, lightning, wind, things like that. So we ended up even having leftover after the reduction. And we still had a great day of training. The round count isn't completely, it's certainly not the only metric that we can use. The other side of that coin is there's a big difference between live fire and dry fire and laser supported shooting or whatever. So it is important to make sure that you spend some amount of money on the ammo, regardless of how expensive it is, so you don't end up with a false confidence based on a bunch of dry fire practice with no real experience in managing recoil or feeling slide lock or the other things that you can only get from live fire situations.
Absolutely. The recoil is important. I mean, with a laser pistol, the CERT training pistols, I have several, and they are an excellent training tool. In fact, dry fire with them has improved my own marksmanship abilities. But at the same point in time, you're building that muscle memory and everything, but you're not getting that recoil. And once you get a few shots, I'll have students in classes, I'm sure you've seen the same, where they'll start out great, and then somewhere, throughout the day, their hand gets a little fatigued or something, and they start developing a little flinch or some anticipation, and you have to dial it back and, bring it to their attention. And that's what you get from that recoil that you can never get from a laser pistol, that you need to just be cognizant of. Because I tell everyone, tell me if you agree or not, everyone can develop a flinch. It's just something that it does happen with a high round count training day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I'm always careful with the word flinch. A lot of people, hear different things. They think of different things. I think you use the word anticipation of the recoil or impulse and sort of shying away from that. That definitely can occur. I worry more about the overconfidence that comes from, firing 5 or 6 shots from the CERT pistol in a second into a target across the room and thinking, okay, that's my pace. Well, I always say photons don't generate much recoil. So your pace of how fast you can pull a trigger on a CERT pistol, even if it's tuned to be exactly like the trigger on your gun, is really irrelevant if you're not managing recoil. So there are some things you can do with CERT pistols, 100%, literally a 1-to-1 replication of what you're actually going to do in a defensive situation. You mentioned that the CERT pistol has really helped your marksmanship. Absolutely. It's great. It's a great marksmanship tool. Unfortunately, marksmanship isn't the end all be all of defensive firearms.
Right.
I think of like getting the gun from the holster to a shooting position and firing that first shot into the target. You can replicate that 100% with a CERT pistol. Assuming you've got a CERT pistol that is the size and shape of your actual carry gun, and you can carry it in a holster in the same place that you would carry your carry gun. You can practice that, recovering from getting caught off guard, you're startled, or maybe you go to the ready position, you drive out and take that first shot. That's exactly the same as it would be with the real gun. However, the minute you break that shot and there isn't any recoil, it's now something else. And that's what's really important to remember. So I would tell people who've already developed their skill, who've already done live fire classes, who have a lot of repetition in live fire, to learn to manage recoil, recognize slide lock, recognize malfunctions, get the gun back into the fight, all of those things. stick to the things with the SIRT pistol that you can practice well with the SIRT pistol. And obviously something like a reload, that's just not one of them, right? Because you can't feel slide lock. You can't run the slide as we teach in our programs to get around in the chamber. You can't even hit the slide release if that's something that you're taught or that you practice in your doctrine. Whoever's listening on the show that doesn't follow our doctrine, you still can't do that either, right? All you can do is drop the magazine and insert the magazine. Well, drop the magazine and insert the magazine. It's fine for in between fights, the tactical reload or the strategic reload or topping your gun off or whatever you want to call it, but it's not the same as an emergency reload. So thinking you're getting replication of practice of an emergency reload when you're not can be really dangerous. So there are other ways to train that, but the best way is live fire.
Right. Absolutely. I agree 100%. It's, you can simulate something. It doesn't matter what the skill is that you're trying to conquer. You can simulate something as much as you want, but ultimately you just got to get in it and do it, with real life. And tell me if you agree with this. I tell my beginning students to make a dedication to their training, that they'll take one, I'm doing air quotes right now, advanced class per year, and get to the range and practice those skills that they've learned at least once a month. And of course, that's not always feasible, not always possible, but that is kind of the goal that I want people to set for themselves to keep their skills fresh. Is that something that you would agree with or adjust?
I absolutely 100% agree with the frequent practice, right? So you got to remember there's a huge difference between someone who is developing their skills and someone who has developed them. So if someone has developed their skills to what they consider a reasonable level, and that's sort of a whole nother show maybe, what does that mean? But let's just use that as a benchmark that someone says, okay, I've been to a class or two or three, I've researched this, I've watched that, I've studied this, I've been coached, I've developed my technique, I've established a baseline. Maintenance is incredibly important. And we talk about the phrase I use is front load your practice. So if you learn something new, it's really important to get a lot of repetition and a lot of practice soon after you learn it so that you own the skill. It starts to become intuitive, the responses become automated, things like that. If you go to a class and you don't practice what you learned afterwards, you're probably not going to be able to implement those things that you were exposed to in a brief period of time that you didn't practice to an intuitive, application kind of level, right? An automated level. So it becomes really important. Go to a class, then you practice frequently. And whether that's once a month or once a week, or maybe it's once a week for a month, and then it's once every other week for 3 months, and then it's once a month for the rest of your life, that would be great. As far as taking the advanced class, that becomes sort of nebulous to me because the need or the justification to spend the time, spend the money, spend the effort to go out and adopt, quote unquote, advanced skills, or if you just think of it as expanding your abilities, becomes less and less reasonable for the average person, right? If the average person hasn't changed their behavior, hasn't changed their lifestyle, if crime trends haven't changed, if they haven't changed their family structure, well, there may not be a justification to go out and spend the money or the ammo or the time to take a whole new class. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean by family structure. Let's say that you've got a guy in his 20s who goes out and gets his concealed carry permit, takes a class. Next year, he takes another class. A couple years later, he takes his third class, following a progression. Let's say they're in our program. They take in the intuitive defensive shooting program. They come back, they take the, they might take the advanced pistol handling course. And then the third or fourth year, they come back and they take a defensive rifle course because now they've got a rifle stage in their house. And that's great. And they might go 2 or 3 or 4 more years without ever taking another class. And I wouldn't criticize them for that if nothing's changed and if they're doing their practice and they're maintaining, they're building their career, they're dating, they're doing whatever they're doing. They can't justify the time, effort, and energy. Now, 4 or 5 years later, they've gotten married, they've got a kid, and now they're starting to think about something like, well, gee, what if I'm out at the mall with my wife? What if I'm out at the mall with my kid and I need to be able to defend them? Maybe there's different skills that I need to learn, and they come out and they take an armed home defense class or an armed family defense class, or maybe they take the 2-person armed defense class with their wife because their wife has also got a concealed carry permit and is trained in the basics and in the fundamentals. So as your circumstances change, it makes sense that you would expand or change your training or acquire new skills. You think of a law enforcement officer, goes to the academy, goes through some advanced defensive tactics classes, maybe goes and takes a private sector pistol class. They work on practicing their skills and maintaining them. Then they try out for the SWAT team. Well, if they're going to get on the SWAT team and they're going to be handed a submachine gun or a rifle, now they need to go out and get that new training to acquire new skills for this new role they have or the new tool that they've adopted. So I don't necessarily, I wouldn't subscribe to the idea that you're somehow delinquent if you don't take a new class to expand your skills every year, but you're absolutely being delinquent if you aren't practicing the skills you already, believe you have frequently.
That makes perfect sense. I think that I subscribe to the once a year idea for me personally in my own training regimen, just because the way I equate it to is a butcher, an instructor being a butcher, and a butcher has to stop and periodically sharpen his knife. And I'll tell you, when I take a class at the student level, and I have an instructor who I trust, and of course I'm going to vet that instructor well. It's not just going to be anybody. I find that they will point out from time to time little mistakes or little training scars that I may have developed within the past year. I think just the human memory, the human brain can sometimes play tricks. There is a problem with that if you start to train under too many different instructors and too many different instructors have different ways of doing things. One is going to force you to do it one way. One is going to force you to do it another way. So there is definitely some negatives that can come up with training too much under too many different methodologies. But at the same point in time, like I said, from my own personal point of view, I equate it to a butcher sharpening his knife. I always want to make sure that my personal skills are high. And in a training class, it's not about, and I know we agree on this 100%, it's not about what we can do as instructors. We're not there to show off and, ooh, look what I can do. We're there to make sure that the student, we're increasing their skill and their ability. And I like to equate it to, to Mike Tyson and his trainer. There's no doubt in my mind that Mike Tyson, with one hand behind his back, can whoop his trainer silly, but his trainer can still make him a better fighter. And I think that is a huge part of, personally what I believe my job responsibilities are when someone, hires me on to be an instructor for them.
Yeah, it's definitely. I believe it's a lot harder to teach than it is to shoot, and it's a lot easier to practice shooting than it is practice teaching. So I've gotten a lot of static over the last couple of decades for pointing that out to a lot of guys that really want to make their ability as an instructor somehow related to their ability to shoot, or set some kind of a minimum standard of shooting skill. I mean, I've even heard instructors who say things like, if their students can outshoot them, they'll retire. And I'm like, well, God, I hope a student outshoots them quick, because with that attitude, we don't need them as instructors. And then they come up with convoluted, drills that they use as the metric for that. And of course, no students can outshoot them at their own drill they've practiced 5,000 times. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that they look cool and never have to live up to their commitment to get out of the way, I guess. But, those extremists aside, I think most instructors have a hard time really defining what their skill level should be based on. I think that the problem is there's a difference between shooting well and demonstrating well, right? So there's a difference between me demonstrating my ability to shoot a drill or my ability to complete a course of fire and my ability to demonstrate a technique to a student in a way that they can observe and learn as well as possible and watch the details. By definition, it almost has to be slow and methodical, right? So it's hard when we go through instructor development classes for IC Training Company. When we do our 5-day course, one of the hardest parts is talking through a slide lock reload while demonstrating each part without stopping, restarting, or correcting yourself. And that's really hard to do for a lot of new instructors because it requires very good, control of your skills as far as your body movements and the movement of the gun and the pressing of the magazine release and finding the magazine and all those things. But also you have to know exactly what you're talking about. And of course, you're doing all this while making eye contact with the students, not looking at your gun and not reading off a, teleprompter. So that to me is a development of skill from an instructor standpoint. On the other side, most instructors are also interested in having the gun to protect themselves, their family, their community, whatever. So we've got to remember that there's a difference between what we're doing as instructors to be better, and then what we're actually just doing to either maintain our skills, as you said, kind of keep our knives sharp as people who carry guns or stage guns for defense. And those really are two very, very different things. So from your standpoint, when you say like you personally like to go out and kind of hold yourself to that standard, it is important to remember that, you're a professional engaged in the business of educating people in firearms. So I think there's definitely a higher bar that one should set as far as knowing what's going on in the community, testing your own theories, comparing notes with other instructors. Now, I do think one of the myths from, decades ago that still persists, this idea that you need to go to a class to see what other people are teaching. The fact is that in 2020, you can get on the internet and see everything that's being taught. You can see videos, any of the national level instructors, any of the schools, they're all putting out videos. They're all publishing articles. Students are posting reviews. There's videos on Instagram or YouTube of what they're teaching. So I don't need to go to, Billy Bob's School of Gunfighting in Minnesota to know what they're teaching at Billy Bob's School of Gunfighting in Minnesota. Now, if what I see in those videos or what I see in the social media or what I see in the student reviews is intriguing or interesting, either from a positive or negative standpoint, I can dig more into that. And yeah, eventually, if I decide, wow, this is really innovative, this is really impressive, this really is blowing my mind, I want to know more about this, then I'm going to go to Billy Bob's School of Gunfighting in Minnesota and actually take the class. But the idea that I have to go to the class to see what's really being taught, that's just a fallacy. It's a leftover fallacy that maybe wasn't even true in 1985 when there were 10 schools, but it's certainly not true now when there's 1,000 schools out there, 1,000 different instructors that are active doing this kind of stuff. It's very, very important to remember that, because that's how you get into trouble when you talk about following different methodologies or going to different schools. That is not something that the average concealed carry person should be doing. It just doesn't make any sense to go take 3 pistol classes that are basically of the same level, so to speak, like 3 different fundamental defensive pistol classes from 3 different schools of thought. You're going to be worse off at the end of the year potentially than you are at the beginning of that year. I think it's way better to do the research, watch the videos, read the books, read the articles, read the student reviews, pick one of those schools that makes the most sense to you, and then go take a class or 2 or 3 over a couple years with that one school of thought, develop your skills to a baseline, and then continue your research, right? Always be out there looking around, seeing what else is going on. But I do think that, take the martial arts analogy. If you're doing a Muay Thai class on Tuesday and a Taekwondo class on Thursday and a Wing Chun class on Friday, you're going to throw kicks in different ways. You're going to throw punches in different ways. You're going to stand in different ways. That's going to prevent you from really excelling in any of those forms. And I think that's something everybody needs to stay grounded in, especially at the beginner level.
Absolutely agree. Using that martial arts analogy was an excellent point. I've been in and out of martial arts. I'm not really great at it, but I've always somewhat enjoyed it. I haven't gone in a while, but when I switched from one school to another, just based upon geography when I moved, they were throwing side kicks differently. And I had been always doing it one way where I would rotate on my feet. And when I did that, and of course the end result was the same, but it wasn't their way of doing it. They wanted me to kind of preload where you're cocking your leg up first, whatever. It's not important exactly how, but it is important that they had 2 different ways of achieving the same end goal, and it was mandated that you do it a certain way. And so that analogy is perfect because, if you're going to bounce between 2 different schools and each one is doing something different, and it's again the same end goal, you're going to start to confuse yourself. And I think it KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I favor consistency and muscle memory. I want to have no thought in a high stress situation where my life is on the line. I just want to have that pre-programmed action to react and not have to think about how I'm going to react. So I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's important that that both ways of throwing that kick. Let's stick with that, right? Both ways of throwing that kick may result in the same amount of energy being transferred to a target. But one of them ultimately has to just, if nothing else, make more sense to you. Now, it is possible that maybe with your body type, one way of generating that energy will be more efficient than the other, and that will make your choice for you, right? If you have more flexibility in your hip than somebody else, then one technique might be better for you. But ultimately, if all other things are equal, you have to pick so that you don't end up in that kind of cross muscle memory confusion moment when it comes time to push your foot up against the person's body and get them off of you or hurt them or break a rib or whatever it is you're trying to do with that side kick. So the same thing with a reload technique, or the same thing with presentation from the holster, or the same thing with trigger press. Like if you really look at it from 1,000 feet away and say, well, they'll all achieve the goal, they all put the bullet into the target. Okay, get 500 feet away and look a little closer. Maybe you have to be 100 feet away and you have to decide, well, what works better for my hand? What works better for my gun? What works better with my vision? What works better with my philosophy or my sort of ethos of how I believe I'm going to use this gun or need this gun in the future? Pick your school of thought and then stick with it. One of the hardest things to do sometimes is, challenge the instructor a little bit and say, and I think this is something everyone should do. I think it's a must for educators to be ready for this kind of a challenge. And the student needs to ask why, and feel free to throw that up, well, you're teaching me to reload that way. I went to this other school. They taught me to reload this way. Why are you teaching what you're teaching? And this is where the martial arts analogy quite often ends, because a lot of arts, because they are arts, will tell you, well, this is how we've done it for 500 years. Shut up and do the kick the way we told you to. There may not even be a why for that instructor who's just following tradition and following doctrine. And if you run into that in the self-defense world, the armed defense world in 2020, you might just nod and sneak away at the next reload break. Because if that's all you're getting from your supposed educator is, well, this is the way we've always done it, or this is the way we teach it here, or this is the way the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines taught me to do it, that's not good enough. And even the subjective stuff, like, well, watch me, I can do it really fast. Again, that's not good enough. There's got to be an objective justification from your educator for why they believe what they're teaching you is the right way for you. Not for them, not for the Navy, not for some guy 300 years ago, but for you today, or more likely tomorrow, in the context that you might need the skills. And that's really hard to find sometimes. And that's what's worth shopping around for, is what's the explanation.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like to be challenged on their belief structure. When I got out of high school and got a job in manufacturing and, coming up, I know nothing. And the lead guys would be telling me to do this, do that. And I would always ask, why? And it wasn't that I was questioning that I had a better way, or it was just I was trying to understand the theory behind the practice. And it pissed every single one of them off. They just absolutely couldn't tolerate me questioning them onto why. And a lot of times they couldn't give me an answer. But like I was saying, it wasn't me trying to question their methodology as far as knowing a better way or whatever. It was more about me trying to understand the theory behind the practice so that I can apply that to future instances. I can apply that theory. Oh, last time we did it this way because ABC. So next time it might not ABC, it might be DEF. Therefore, I can't do it the same way. People just sometimes, they don't like to be questioned. And I agree with you. As an instructor, I start all my classes telling the students, you know what? If you've got a difference of opinion, if you don't understand what I'm saying to you or why I'm saying it to you, I want you to challenge me. I want you to question me. I will have an answer for you. Because, as far as reloads, why do we do slide lock versus the slide stop? I'm sorry, why do we do overhand rack versus the slide stop? Obviously, because it comes down to what's going to work over the broadest spectrum of factors, and not training yourself to do another technique. And there's a number of reasons why we would do the overhand rack, and then well, it's easier just to hit that slide lock and use it as a release. But you can go into the reasons. What if my hands are bloody? What if my hands are sweaty? What if it's an unfamiliar firearm, etc.? What if it's one of those types of firearms where that slide stop is not really designed to be a release and is very hard to press? So there's a lot of reasons why we reload the way we reload, and that's just one of the many things to be done with firearms. I tell everyone there's no one size fits all anything when it comes to the gun world. If there was, we'd only have one gun and one holster. And obviously, we've got thousands of guns and millions of holsters for a reason. Everyone's body is different, size is different, techniques are different, capabilities are different, lifestyles are different. And that's why we have different gear, different accessories.
Yeah, there's a big difference between the instructor that will teach 5 different ways to reload a gun and then tell the student group as a body, like, pick whatever you like. Again, I have no time for that guy because you're not really educating. You're not really committing to sort of deserving the money, right? Like if someone's going to pay me for life and death information, I feel like I owe them an actual decision. If I'm not capable or willing to make that, capable of or willing to make that decision, then I don't deserve the money. So if somebody comes to me and says, how should I, reload this gun, or what gun is best for me, or what grip is the best for defensive shooting, and I just simply say, well, here's 3 different grips, pick the one that works for you. Well, they don't need me, right? So the idea is, however, because as you said, there's different guns, different people, different contexts, different hands, different shapes, different sizes, different capabilities. It is important as an instructor that I understand different options for certain things so that I can give each individual student the correct answer for them, as opposed to just, this is what the curriculum teaches, or this is what I teach. So I always, that's kind of a big deal. I will be adamant, this is what I believe is best for you. The guy next to you, I might think this is what's best for him. That's not interchangeable information. It's not me changing my mind. It's different people with different circumstances require different answers. And ultimately, remember, I might be wrong, and that's okay. And if I find out I'm wrong later, I'll let you know and I'll change my advice. But until I find out I'm wrong, I've got to commit to something. Otherwise, I'm not, earning my money. And I think that's maybe the last piece that's important to go back to. When you took that job and you were working for someone else, that there is a difference when someone says, do it this way because I'm your boss, then someone saying, do it this way as the person you're paying, right? So you're the customer in a private sector training class. And that's very different from, being in the military or being in a police academy, and the sergeant's going to say, do it this way. Sometimes you just say, yes, sergeant, and drive on, because that's what you do. They're paying you, right? They're telling you what to do. In a private sector class, it's completely the opposite, right? The students should be demanding an explanation for anything they're doing in the class, and they deserve it. They're the ones that are there to be educated, not just to be told, do it this way because I want you to.
I agree, 100%. I couldn't have said it any better. Let's switch gears a little bit. Tell me about Walk the Talk.
Walk the Talk America is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization that was founded by Mike Sedini, former president of Eagle Imports. He also is my partner in Avidity Arms, and he's just one of the nicest guys in the gun community. He's been part of the gun community through his family, pretty much all of his life. His family started Eagle Imports 30-something years ago, but maybe it's just over 30 years ago now. He has since retired from being the president of Eagle, and at this point has devoted himself full-time to Walk the Talk America. And I joined him within minutes of him asking me and telling me about the project a couple of years ago, a little over 2 years ago now. And Walk the Talk America is all about aggressively, assertively getting involved in what happens at the intersection of mental health issues and firearms, and doing it obviously from a pro-Second Amendment, gun-friendly, pro-gun rights standpoint. recognizing if there are negative outcomes at that intersection, whether it's suicide, which obviously is the biggest issue, or if we're talking about judgment issues that come from dementia, if we're talking about attention to detail issues, if we're talking about impulse control, rage control issues that come maybe from going on or off of an antidepressant. There are all types of mental health issues that affect one's ability to responsibly own, carry, and use firearms. And then, of course, coming back to the big one, suicide prevention, there are absolutely issues where even just having a conversation, there are individuals where having a conversation with them about access to firearms during a crisis moment might change their behavior in that crisis moment. We have some very simple ways we can address those issues inside of the gun community. And one of them is just awareness and education about the importance of asking for help and having conversations, with peers, with friends, with family, with mental health professionals. Being assertive about finding out if there's really a problem, taking online anonymous screenings for different mental health disorders, which we offer through WTTA.org, powered by Mental Health America, which is a 110-year-old organization that is a civil rights organization that works to defend the rights and protect the rights of people who are living with mental health issues. So we've partnered with people inside of the mental health community that also respect individual rights and civil rights, including the right to keep and bear arms. But we all recognize that there are times when an individual is going to be better off without having an immediate access to firearms, or when society is going to be better off because that individual doesn't have immediate access to firearms because of issues that they're going through and dealing with. And overwhelmingly, those are transient, temporary moments in time. It's not to say that because somebody is dealing with an issue this week, they should never touch a firearm again, but maybe this week they shouldn't. And what we look for at Walk the Talk America are non-legislative, non-regulatory ways that we can help members of the gun community deal with mental health issues responsibly, help to reduce those negative outcomes. And on the other side of that coin, one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is working with mental health professionals to help them understand the gun community and understand responsible gun ownership and gun use. Because it is true, it's a cliche for a reason that most mental health professionals aren't actively pro-gun. Most of them come to the firearm world looking at it like, well, firearms in your life increase risk. If you want to reduce risk, get rid of the firearms in your life. And while that math makes a lot of sense to them, it doesn't make any sense to us. And it's really important that they respect that. And the model we use is a model called, the idea of cultural competency, understanding a culture that's different from your own. And we really try to emulate the LGBTQ community's work inside of the mental health world. So in other words, a mental health professional that has someone, reach out to them for help, if that person is gay, the mental health professional doesn't have to be gay or even understand really or empathize with or even condone a gay lifestyle in their own life to be able to help them as a mental health professional. They really just need to be culturally competent and sensitive and I guess respectful of the fact that lifestyle choice is valid for a human being to make, even if they don't want to make it. And let's move past that and focus on the mental health issues. And that's essentially what we want to do with the gun world. If someone might say, I don't want a gun in my life, I don't even think people should have guns, but I respect that this person's right to choose to have guns in their life. I'm going to move past that and focus on the mental health issues. And we've had a lot of great success with our cultural competency classes for mental health professionals, which now are even accepted for continuing education credits in Nevada, and we're looking at expanding that to a nationwide program here very soon. Probably in 2021, we'll be adding several states to that program so that mental health professionals actually get professional credit for having gone through this class and learning more about something that is a part of a third of the American's life. Over 100 million gun owners in America, and according to some surveys, approaching 50% of Americans have guns in the household, even if they're not their own guns. So this is definitely something that mental health professionals should be paying attention to and should learn more about. And I'm really proud of that aspect of Walk the Talk America.
So I have an opinion and a story, but I want to get your opinion first. Why do you think that more gun owners don't seek mental health care? Even let's just say you're in a funk. We've all gone through a funk where it's just like, man, things aren't going my way, and I need to go talk to someone just to kind of clear the air, clear my head. I want to go talk to someone. Why do you think more gun owners don't do that?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is a foundational reason with the type of person who carries a gun every day. It's in the theory that they're going to be able to defend themselves or others in a worst case scenario. When you look at that premise, you're talking about a human being that wants to be in control, that recognizes that there are times in life when you could be out of control and you want to be prepared to take control back on your own. You're not going to call 911. You may call 911, but you're not going to count on the police to get there to stop something. You're not going to count on somebody else to protect you. You're not going to count on somebody else to protect your family. You're taking ownership over being prepared to solve that problem. So if someone is walking out of their house, going to work or going to the mall with their kids, and they believe that if, Al Qaeda shows up, they're going to pull their Glock out and solve the problem, having a bad day or being in a funk compared to, ISIS attacking the mall doesn't seem acute. It doesn't seem like that big a deal. So that person is already sort of predefined to say, I can deal with this. I can take care of it. I don't need to reach out to help. I don't need to ask someone else to take care of me. I'm the person that takes care of things around here. Right. So you've got that initial sort of worldview that I think gets in the way. And the other side then is even if someone crosses that line and says, okay, this is an area, this isn't shooting, a terrorist in the face if I need to. This is something I'm not equipped to deal with. I'm not prepared to deal with. And by its very nature, this problem may require outside help. When someone recognizes that, one of the biggest problems we've got in the gun community is that, for a long time now, we've had a lot of fear mongering around what I would call the weaponization of mental health issues against gun owners. And in some cases, it's very justified that anti-gun or pro-gun control entities have used mental health issues and mental health as a cover, and mental health in general as a cover for their gun control agenda and furthering an anti-gun narrative in this country. Unfortunately, that fear mongering has pushed so far in our community that you've got plenty of people who are gun owners or I think of like the veterans community who are very much afraid that if they ask for help, they're somehow going to magically and immediately lose their gun rights permanently. And that's just simply not the case. It's very, very hard inside of the VA, for example, or inside of even someone who's active duty or in the reserves or in the Guard, someone who's still inside of the military. It's very, very hard to take away someone's gun rights because they raise their hand and say, I'm concerned about some mental health issues, or they ask for help, even to the point of saying that they have suicidal issues that they need to have addressed. It's very hard to have someone get their gun rights taken away. In some states, we know that the red flag laws have been put in place where it's easier, at least on a temporary basis, to have people lose their firearms rights. But that's something we're working to fix, right? As a gun community and as a society, we're working to address those problems. Ultimately, one of the really hard questions that has to be asked is if you sit down a gun owner and you say, okay, if you had a friend who was a gun owner, pick, your best friend, the guy you go to shoot competitions with, the guy you go to classes with, the person you teach classes with, and you thought there was a 2% chance that they were going to commit suicide this weekend impulsively if they had immediate access to guns. But you also thought there was a 2% chance that if they talked to a mental health professional, they would lose their gun rights because of the outcome of that conversation. Which one of those would you choose? And to me, it should be really easy to say, I'll take the 2% chance that they lose their gun rights. We can fight that in court. We can figure that out. They still move, they are still alive. If the 2% chance that they kill themselves, they are not alive anymore. They don't, who cares if they have gun rights and they're dead? So ultimately, I think that's a really hard position for a lot of people in the gun community to take, right? And I'm told that I should, just even saying that out loud makes me a traitor to the cause of guns. Like, ultimately, on that Sunday evening, it's more important that that person is getting the help than that they have a gun in their holster or they have a gun staged in a quick access safe in their home. Because is there a 0.00001% chance that ISIS does show up at their house and they don't have a gun to defend themselves, and that's the tragedy on that Sunday night? Yes. But when we really look at, apples to apples, the chances of someone committing suicide with a gun that they own responsibly and legally, incredibly low. But the chances of someone losing their gun rights because they go to a counselor is even lower, when we look at the statistics. So it's really important to keep that in mind and to encourage people not to worry so much about losing their gun rights and worry about the very real mental health issues that they may be struggling with. And we'll deal with the gun rights issues in the court if we have to.
I think that you hit the nail on the head with the fear that gun owners have about losing their guns, losing their gun rights, because we do see stories in the news of that very thing happening. Obviously, we don't know how many instances there are of gun owners who do seek counseling or therapy or whatever, and nothing ever happens to their gun rights. We don't hear about that, but we hear about the times when the guns are taken away. And so there's that fear that's there. And I'll tell you, that fear lives inside of me. I had a roofing company at the time that I started doing firearm training, and I was stressed. I was stressed, and I was coming home in a bad mood. I wasn't sleeping. All these different things compound. And my wife was like, this isn't you. Just go talk to someone. Go just get this figured out. Like, you're just always in a bad mood. I knew why I was in a bad mood. I wasn't dealing with the work situation very well, and I refused to go talk to someone. I mean, I think I went once just to shut her up and then never went back. And the reason being, 100% honest reason, I did not want to accidentally say something that would have this, person who doesn't really know me on the other side of the table report me. And say, hey, this guy is violent, or this guy, is having some, thoughts that I don't agree with, or, might just be a fanatical anti-gun, and they're out there. But that is the reason why I would not do it. Now, I'm no longer in the roofing industry. I'm teaching more and more. I am a very vocal gun rights activist. I am working as an armed security officer. If I were to lose in Illinois the firearm owner identification card, that would ruin me financially. And on top of that, it would take many, many thousands of dollars and many years to not only recover that firearm owner identification card, but as well to get the guns back. And that's just not time or money that I have. And I think a lot of gun owners, as you said, right, that's very much the fear that gun owners have. I think that is the reason why more gun owners just simply won't go out and simply, just like I said, just talk to someone. There have been times, like I said, back when I had the roofing company many years ago, 7 years ago, I closed it. There were times back then where I probably should have. Simply closing the company was solved all those problems, and I'm glad I did in retrospect, because it allowed me to focus on my passion. But at the same point in time, at that time in my life, I probably really should have spoken to someone.
It's really important for people to understand that all of those things you mentioned, the having the guns taken away, the court costs, the replacement of the guns, losing the FOID card, all those things. If you think about a police officer, right? They deal with that. If they're barred from access to firearms, well, then they, theoretically, they've just lost their profession, right? So it's a big deal. So I don't want to underplay how big a deal it is. I do want to say that I still think that the potential risk can almost always outweigh the potential risk of not seeking help, especially in the long term, can almost always outweigh the risks of seeking help. And especially if you start with a very, if you pick up the phone and you say, I feel like I'm going to kill myself and everyone around me. Yeah, I get it. I understand your concern about someone maybe showing up and taking your guns away. But if you start early, just with the things you can do every single day to, just like you eat healthy, or just like you do, you work out, or just like you pay attention if you're putting on a few more pounds, and you think twice before you have the third soda of the day and the second bag of chips. you can do those things from a mental health standpoint, right? So I think sometimes we focus way too much on the, what we call like stage 4. There's a concept that runs around the mental health community, B4 stage 4. And you think of like stage 4 cancer. You get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Well, there's almost like, the idea is there's no treatment, just resign yourself. You have so many months or years to live, and that's it. And if you wait until stage 4 of a mental health crisis, then you're looking at, red flag laws and confiscation and incarceration and, involuntary confinement, things like that. What I'm talking about is get involved early. Work on your mental health like you work on your physical health. And that's important too, to remember that it is very much like that. If I say I hurt my arm, right, or if you hear Rob Pincus injured his arm last week, you don't know what that means. Did it get, bitten off by a shark? Or did I, hit my funny bone and I couldn't do a demo during a class? Somewhere between those two things are all the different ways I could physically have injured my arm. Some of them affect me forever. Some of them affect me for 5 minutes. Some of them require surgery. Some of them require amputation. Some of them require stitches. You just don't know. And when someone says that they're concerned about their mental health, or you hear someone seeing a mental health professional for assistance, it's exactly the same. You don't know if they're just, in a funk or if they really are in a crisis mode, or if they've lost their ability to comprehend what's going on around them and make sound judgment. You think about dementia. I think it's really important. Like if you take grandpa's keys away, grandpa shouldn't have a shotgun behind the door, and that's sensitive to a lot of people in the gun community. Well, that guy, he fought in Korea. How can I take away his guns? Well, because you just took away his car keys. If you don't trust him driving down the street, how are you going to trust him to tell the difference between the UPS guy and the Nazi that he thinks he's fighting from World War II when he comes to the front door? And that's a very real conversation, but it's at a crisis mode. If we think about this for the average gun owner, it's about mindfulness, or it's about talking to a therapist, or it's about taking a screening where there's literally something approaching 0% chance of any other human being even knowing that you've done this work for yourself, let alone someone getting involved in confiscating your guns. The Hold My Guns organization, holdmyguns.org, they promote going to a gun shop and saying, hey, I want you to store my guns for me while I go through this crisis. We can do that with our friends. We can do this with each other. In Illinois, in New Jersey, in New York, you always hear these, gun owners will throw up this flag like, well, no, I can't just give my guns to a friend because they don't have a FOID card, and that's a felony. You can give them the firing pin, and we have to be smarter than that, right? If I'm telling a guy, if I'm talking to my brother in New Jersey and he's going through a crisis and he says, yeah, I'm thinking about taking my guns to so-and-so's house, I can remind him that that's a felony for him transferring the guns and for the friend taking the guns, but he could take an essential part out of the gun that makes it impossible for him to be able to use it and achieve the same goal from an impulse, not trusting one's impulse control in a suicidal, crisis. You've just made the gun unusable, and that doesn't mean take the firing pin from somebody and not tell them, because obviously when they find out, they can just go buy another one and put it back in there. It all has to be voluntary. And that gets lost in the translation sometimes. Like somebody's going to hear this interview or this conversation we're having, and they're going to say, Rob Pincus wants people to have their guns taken away. I don't want that at all. I don't want the government involved. I want common sense to prevail. I want the person who goes to a mental health professional who says, yeah, you really are in a time of crisis, and you have to understand, here's how impulse works, and here's how suicidal impulses can be executed and acted on. And if you had a firearm within reach and it was loaded and you went through one of these moments, you might make a decision that you can't take back. However, if you disassembled your gun and it took you 8 steps to be able to get the gun into a condition where you could use it to perpetuate a suicide attempt, during those 8 steps, you might reconsider. You might slow down. And we have this concept called cause a pause. And cause a pause is as simple as, put a picture of your kids or your mom or, the American flag or, your motorcycle or whatever it is that's going to motivate you to just pause for a minute when you go to your gun safe. If that's your impulse and that you're in a moment of crisis and you're feeling desperate and you're feeling like there's no other option, and you go to reach for your gun and you see that picture of your kids or your wife or your mom or whoever on the safe, that might be the thing that causes a pause. And that has nothing to do with red flag laws, nothing to do with government interaction. That doesn't even have anything to do with talking to a mental health professional. That's just setting yourself up to reconsider a rash action in a moment of crisis. And people will say, well, I could just as easily jump in front of a train. Really? If I'm carrying a loaded gun around in a holster on my body, it's way easier for me to pull that gun out and put it to my head than it is for me to go find a train to jump in front of, or a tall building to jump off of, or set up a noose so I can strangle myself. So these things are important to consider. They are important to talk about. And I think they're important to confront, even if it's uncomfortable. And even if there are people on the planet of Earth who will use these issues to try to advance their gun control narrative. I'm not that person. You're not that person. Our fellow gun owners aren't that person. The guy who owns the gun range isn't that person. And we need to be working within our community to address these issues.
So you said there's anonymous tests on the Walk the Talk America website. Is it? I don't even know if it's legally possible, but are there mental health professionals out there that are doing anonymous phone calls or face-to-face visits where you don't even have to give a name? Obviously, it's expensive. They want to make money, insurance. So it's very hard to be anonymous unless you're independently wealthy that you can pay this person cash and don't ask any questions, so to speak. Do you know about anything like that where these maybe a phone call or an 800 number or something? Is there any sort of anonymous where you can actually talk to a person?
Yeah, there's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And there's a lot of other free and anonymous, crisis moment intervention hotlines, 800 numbers, online chats. That's all out there available. And at the end of the day, I get it. Like, you could come to WTTA.org, click on the page of screenings, click on the depression screening test. You could take the depression screening test. And theoretically, like, Russian hackers could find out that you did that, get your results, contact the local police and say, look, this guy got a 9 out of 10 on the depression screening. You might want to look at him and see if he should have guns. Like, could that happen? Yes. Has it happened? No. Thousands of people.
I think Dimitri has a lot more important things to do than to release your mental health information.
Right, but see, this is the point. Is like, there's someone out there who's going to say, well, George Soros is going to pay hackers that are aligned with Everytown for gun safety to hack the WTTA and Mental Health America website and try to see how many gun owners are suffering from extreme depression or have suicidal tendencies. Like, I get that could happen. But the thousands of people who've been helped by this, which is as far as we know, there's been a 100% security maintained anonymous screening process, outweigh that possibility of some extreme ridiculousness so much that I won't even consider it. I'll say it out loud because somebody in the comments section is going to bring it up. And I'm going to say, yeah, I get it. Move on. Like, it could happen. Move on. Because ultimately there has to be a level of trust. There has to be a level of faith in the good intentions of the process. So every one of these mental health professionals that contributes the screenings, to the information you can find online, to podcasts, to articles that are written, for all the self-help stuff that's out there, they have done this. So they've done what you're saying. They provided this information free of charge. They provided information where certainly at the lowest levels, people can go through the rest of their lives dealing with low-level issues without ever having to sign a form or show up at an office or even get on a video chat with a mental health professional, and do really good work for themselves and for their families and their communities and everybody that's around them. At the acute phase, then you've got the 1-800 numbers that, yeah, your phone could be traced. I get it, all those things. But at the end of the day, ultimately, the way it's set up to work, you can call an 800 number and talk to somebody in a moment of crisis. Now, dealing with that 800 number in the moment of crisis doesn't necessarily mean you're never going to have to go get actual help, where you have to go talk to someone, sign a form, get the insurance, pay the fee, whatever. But I'm saying ultimately, if you were at the point where you got talked out of a suicide attempt by an 800 number, it's probably worth giving the guns to your brother, storing the guns at the local gun shop, and really doing some important work with a mental health professional.
Sure. That makes sense. And I think what the number is, like 60%, correct me if I'm wrong, 60% of deaths with the firearm are suicide related. Is that correct?
Yeah, it varies obviously in any given year, but somewhere, well over 50%, and some years approaching 70% of the reported deaths that involve firearms are suicide. So, that's an amazing number when you think about it. And this is something that's brought up a lot, like even from a very selfish political agenda, it behooves the gun community to reduce suicide deaths with firearms. And you cannot get away from that, right? So whenever I hear like a gun community leader or someone in the gun world say something like, well, jumping off a tall building is just as effective as using a gun. So if a gun has an 80-something% efficacy rate in terms of suicide attempts resulting in death, and jumping in front of a train has an 80% success rate, or jumping off a building, taller than 10 stories has an 80% success rate, those things are all true. But ultimately and selfishly, I'm not a train rights advocate, right? I'm not a tall building rights advocate. So if 37,000 people kill themselves with guns this year, and next year 37,000 more people kill themselves by jumping off a tall building, and that results in legislation to put fences and nets around tall buildings, so be it. That doesn't affect my gun rights. It doesn't affect the Second Amendment. It doesn't affect the natural human right of self-defense to have a tall fence and or a net around the tops of tall buildings. So let's legislate the hell out of that, and let's leave the gun rights alone. And one of the ways we can affect that is by being honest about how access to firearms during moments of crisis affects gun ownership negatively. And the most important effect is that gun owners die at their own hands in those moments. And then there is also this political fallout from 37,000 people being listed as gun deaths in any given year, as opposed to 20,000 or 15,000. And that's the kind of difference we're talking about. If you take away over half of the gun deaths, all of a sudden 37,000 going down to 18,000, that's a big difference when the news media reports the stats. That's a big difference when you talk about guns at a congressional hearing. That's a big difference when you take away these talking points from people with an anti-gun agenda. So even selfishly, there's a lot of reasons why the gun community, for the worst reasons, should be fighting against firearms-involved suicide.
Let's get on to a brighter subject. All of that was incredibly important, which is why I asked. I wanted to give you the floor, the platform to get that information out there. Like I said, very important, but it's also a heavy topic. So what else do you have going on in your life?
Oh, man, let's see. The cool thing about canceling the Personal Defense Network training tour and having that time to kind of bounce back and forth between Florida and Colorado this year is that I've really put a whole bunch of time into the development of some side projects that honestly just don't rise to the level of urgency on the average day, because there are classes to teach, and there's traveling to get done, and there's commitments to do video work at different locations and things like that just didn't happen in 2020. So I have put a bunch of time into some collaborations and some projects that were definitely, back burner stuff for years. People will start to see some of those projects come to fruition later in 2020 and also in 2021. Some of that stuff will come out and be public. So there's some really neat stuff, some interesting things that I've been interested in but haven't been able to work on, that I have been able to put time into this year. Personally, I've spent a lot of time with my daughter. My youngest daughter turned 5 in June, and she and I have been traveling all over the country. She spent a lot of time back and forth between Colorado and Florida with me. She has spent a lot of time on the range down in Florida with me, as well as just kind of being around when I'm working, and she's at the age now where she's starting to, put things together and be more observant and ask bigger questions and pay more attention to bigger issues. So, that's been a lot of fun for me on the personal level, and it's some really good bonding time with her. We have been taking some huge steps with the Avidity Arms Project. A lot of people, we make fun of ourselves on the internet a lot for just how long that process seems to be taking to get that gun to market. One of the things we did this last 6 months is we've moved the company permanently to Florida. So we went through a couple of different changes in the last 18 months where, we were partnered with Eagle Imports, obviously, when Mike Sedini worked there, when he was the president of that company. When he retired from Eagle Imports, we also separated Eagle and Avidity. And that really meant about a 6 to 8 month process of just hitting the pause button, worrying about the paperwork and the details of that transition. And in that time, we set the corporation up in Nevada, where Mike lives. And we realized pretty quickly that it made more sense to put that company in Florida, where my business is based, and for a whole bunch of other potential future reasons. So we moved the company from New Jersey to Nevada, and then from Nevada to Florida. But now that all those issues are settled. We have all the new, the manufacturing license and all these things that we had to get from ATF specifically for the location in Florida. all of that is now in good standing, and we are back in full speed ahead towards production. So that's been cool and fun and good. We've also made some real evolutions in the design, so much so that we said the PD-10 as a prototype, as an intention from 4 or 5 years ago. The market and our understanding, my understanding about gun design and engineering, as well as some of the things that have happened in the market with the the Glock 48 coming out, the Hellcat coming out, the 365 coming out from SIG, really looks different than it did 5 or 6 years ago when I originally wrote down the specifications of the PD-10. So that design has really been shelved, and the PD-11, an evolution, or an evolved version, is what we're working on now. And hopefully we'll have some of those to shoot before, probably just within the next 30 to 60 days when this comes out. We will be shooting that and kind of showing that off, what that looks like. We've had some 3D prints and things like that. We're getting the first of the new slides cut. We have the new changes to the internal parts are already done. The changes to the frame have been done, and that's been finalized. So we've got a lot of cool stuff happening there with Avidity Arms. And of course, I'm teaching again. So in September of 2020 is really the first month where I resumed my sort of normal travel schedule and pace, where I'm teaching in several different states, and I'm moving around more than just back and forth from Florida to Colorado. So things are good. I think, like a lot of people, I took advantage of the pause of coronavirus to work on some things to make things better in the future, to improve some aspects of my life that were just sort of stuck in, well, this is how we always do it. This is the inertia. The tour will be better next year. Avidity Arms will be better next year. The training classes and the instructor development process that we do has also gone through some evolution. We're running an instructor development class in Reno the week after Thanksgiving. We'll be out at Reno Guns and Range doing a 5-day instructor development class, which will be the first of the new generation of instructor development. And that's taking a lot of cues from the program that we developed, which obviously you're very familiar with the United States Concealed Carry Association. Their live fire program, Defensive Shooting Fundamentals, is based on our ICE training company protocols. And that partnership, that collaboration has resulted in some evolution. And that evolution is now sort of coming home to roost in the ICE training programs as well.
So I'm going to want to wrap up here in a few minutes, but I would be negligent if I didn't ask a very important question for all the, what I'll say, firearm entrepreneurs out there. You're very successful in the industry. Obviously, you have a wealth of information on, business management within the firearm industry. For someone who is just starting out, or for someone who is really just trying to take that next step, what advice, what information could you give someone that can really kind of help them break through the wall? Because, I know I've been running one business or other since I was 18, and now I'm 42. And I know, hitting my head against the wall is a large part of what I do. So for myself and for everyone else that feels like we're hitting our heads against the wall in the industry, what one piece of advice could you give us that would make our lives easier?
Don't think that I'm not bouncing my head against the wall in the same way. Like at the end of the day, you got to understand that every single one of us that you look at and might think, there's a bunch of cliches out there, where you kind of only see the tip of the iceberg, right? You see the guy who's successful, but you don't see the work that went into it. And you also, I guess, don't see the work that's still going into it. So if somebody's retired and they're on a boat, so be it. But I'm not on a boat yet. I'm not retired. So I'm banging my head against that same wall. I mean, like we just talked about Avidity Arms, right? There's a lot of people that think it's taking too long. Well, SIG and Glock, they might start. Well, Glock hasn't had a real new design, I guess, for 40 years. But SIG, they put something on a drawing board, and it takes them 4 or 5 or 6 years to get that gun to market. But you don't see the process. And with Avidity Arms, you're seeing that process. Pretty much a week after the napkin sketch, we said, "Hey, look what we're going to do," and you're getting to see that. So you don't have to look any farther than that project in Rob World to see that I'm dealing with those same struggles, in a different way. And I may be starting from a different point, and you may think, well, you've got all these advantages because you know people in the industry, and you've got a platform, and you've been on TV, and you sell books on Amazon, and 40,000 here or whatever followers. All that's true, except I'm also trying to start a manufacturing company with a firearm from scratch, one of the most regulated industries in the country, complex engineering, and I'm not an engineer with zero manufacturing experience. and we're trying to bring this company to life. So we're not trying to run a CCW course on Sunday afternoon at the local range. We're trying to do this other thing on the platform that's been established from the 20 years that I've spent in the industry. And there's teaching a CCW course on a Sunday afternoon at the local range when you've never done that before, especially if you're trying to show a profit doing it. That's hard. That might be in a lot of ways harder than Rob Pincus trying to start a gun manufacturing company, right? So I think it's really important to respect the difficulty of starting any new business, respect the difficulty and the seriousness of teaching life and death skills to other people. So whether you're trying to open a gun range or start a manufacturing company or teaching a class, teaching CCW classes or whatever it is you're trying to do, like, don't set that bar so high. Like, I get you need to have goals, you need to be motivated, you need to work towards the future. But if you think there's some magic one piece of advice that Rob can give you to make it easy, you're going to fail miserably. And I don't think anybody's going to give you that advice. And the worst thing...
I think you did give the advice, Rob. I think that you said you've got 20 years and you've got connections, but you weren't born with any of that, right?
Right.
And so it was something that you took 20 years to build up a puzzle piece at a time, and you just kept on pushing. I think that's what I got out of what you were saying, was basically just keep on pushing.
Yeah, but I don't want to oversimplify it. I think that it's important to remember that pushing isn't enough, right? You do have to maybe reevaluate how you're pushing. You need to step back, maybe let somebody push you backwards a little bit or push you sideways and reroute and change. And just sort of don't ever look for that easy. Don't look for the one answer. And what I will say probably is the biggest key to my success, and I've said this in different interviews over time a lot, is don't ever fail to capitalize on an opportunity, right? Be a person that says yes to opportunity. If a student wants you to teach and you have a chance to go to the range and teach that class, and I'm focusing, on instructor stuff, because I know that's kind of the business that you're, engaged in. And probably a lot of your listeners are looking at this from the standpoint of, I'm primarily an educator, you're an educator. What about building my teaching business? Well, if you've got, 1, 2, or 3 students and they're paying you $100 a piece for a 4-hour class in the afternoon, but it's going to cost you $500 to put that class on, I think you need to very, very seriously consider running the class anyway. And look at that $200 that you're quote unquote losing as a businessman. You need to look at that as a $200 investment in practicing your craft, right? Teaching real students on a range for money, doing what it is you say you want to do. So you're paying $200 to get that experience, and you're investing that $200, if you did it well, in 3 advocates who are going to go out and potentially be promoting you, that you can get testimonials from, you can get Google reviews from, you can get videos of them shooting, you can take pictures during your class. There's so much marketing value and professional development value to just getting out on the range and going through that process, even if you're not objectively showing a profit. There's still a lot of theoretical ways in which you can really benefit from just doing it. So that's really important for people to keep in mind, is if you want to do something, say yes to any opportunity you have to do it. Don't try to put all these other parameters around it where you're only going to do it under certain circumstances. I think that's how a lot of people get stalled, get frustrated, and end up failing.
I think that's an excellent piece of advice. Let's give me some closing messages, and then we're going to wrap up this episode.
I think that's, we've covered so much. I think that, again, I'm going to stress for those that what I talked about with mental health, if that resonated with you, if you're that person or you know that person, WTTA.org is the place you go for that information. If the training principles and concepts that I was sharing and the approach to training and philosophy makes sense to you, go to intuitiveshooting.com or ICEtraining.us and look at the courses we have to offer and the articles that have been written, things like that. If you're the person who's just getting started or the person who's been to 15 classes and you're still trying to figure out exactly how you want to approach defensive shooting skill, from either end of that spectrum, personaldefensenetwork.com, that's the place to go. Hundreds of free videos and articles, and not just from me, but from a team of educators from virtually every aspect of personal security, safety, self-defense, firearms skill development. You can learn a lot there for free. You can become a member and learn even more, do some of our distance education classes, things like that. So personaldefensenetwork.com is really the hub for the information that's been honed over the last, 20 plus years. And we've been producing content for PDN since 2005. So there's a lot that can be learned there. And then ultimately, come find me on social media. If the messages, if my approach, if my thought process here is making sense to you, or maybe even if it's not making sense, take a look at Instagram, take a look at Twitter, take a look at Facebook, see what I'm putting out there, see the explanations. And most importantly, as we talked about earlier in the show, ask the questions. Ask me why. If I'm not making it clear, can you use the search engine and go see 15 videos of me teaching emergency reload? Yes, you can. But if you've watched 3 of them and it's still not making any sense, seek me out, ask the question, let's talk about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being on the show today, Rob.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate the opportunity and the conversation. And thank you for continuing to teach others.
It's my pleasure, literally, to teach others. It's something I enjoy very much, as I'm sure you do as well. And that's going to wrap it up for today's show. I want to thank everybody for listening. Stay tuned to future podcasts. Rob was a great guest. I've got some additional great guests lined up. If you have an idea for a future podcast or you have any questions, you want to hit me up on my website, alphaconcepts.com/podcast. If you want to sponsor one of these podcasts, contact Fire and Iron Media. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. As always, everybody, be armed, be trained, and be alpha.